Alright, this will be a video to Spawktalk talking about Keynesian economics. Keynesian. Okay. First thing to consider, I didn't watch Shane DK's video, but the first thing to consider is that when libertarians talk about Keynes, they're talking about pop. You know, there's a difference between pop economics and real economics. When a libertarian responds to what they conceive of as Keynesianism, they're responding to a popular misconception of it. Moreover, it has been my experience. I haven't done a scientific survey of this, but it's been my personal perception that the libertarian strawman of Keynes is the same strawman that popular supporters of Keynesian economics have. That the straw man is held by both the supporters and opponents. Quite a bit fewer of the pop supporters, but still. So that's just what I wanted to say there. Now, if they are in fact saying Keynes said X, Y, and Z, they are or saying that Keynes was a listless spender. That is. They are straw manning, or in my case, knowingly straw manning. Consider that. And one reason for that is because even if you convince me that monetary expansion or deficit spending can be used to bridge a bearish gap, we'll say a bearish gap in aggregate demand or aggregate spending and investing, and that could in fact do better things, I still wouldn't support it in practice, and I still view it as a dangerous idea even if it were true. Because states, especially democratic states, are not going to implement it properly, and what they're simply going to do is they're simply going to use this idea, whether right or wrong, to do a bunch of bullshit. All right? That's how I see it. I see it as a, even if true, an idea that's so, it's kind of kooky almost. I see it as, well, how can it be true but still be kooky? Well, kooky because there's no way it's going to be implemented properly. There's no way politicians are going to implement it properly unless you have some sort of oligarchic, non-democratic state. Okay. So yeah, that's just to let you know what you can convince me of here. You can convince me of this on a theoretical level. You can't convince me of it on a practical level. Never say never, but I think there's like a 20% chance you could convince me of this on a theoretical level. It's probably a 1%, less than 1% chance you could convince me of it on a practical level. I see that, and this is kind of like how I see this ideal state versus anti-statism. I see the idea of an ideal state as like throwing a horseshoe and having it land on the head of a pin, 100 yards at the end zone at the end of the stadium. That's what I see ideal statism as, like something really precise and incredibly unlikely. I see anti-statism as throwing the horseshoe out of the stadium, and that's much more likely than, because all you need is enough force to throw it out to get rid of it altogether, as opposed to like this really precise ideal state. And of course, the retort to that would be, well, it's not quite like that. I mean, Spock would say, I don't think you need to throw it to have it land on the head of the pin. You just need to throw it to where it lands in the end zone. That would the tolerable zone, we would say. Okay. You could break down the analogy that way. Now, for me, I took, in that semester I spent at community college, I took intro to micro and macro economics. So that's about the knowledge level that I have. But in general, I see two schools of thought. The underspending school and the misallocation of resources school. Underspending in terms of investment and in consumption of consumer goods. I know I think there's some post-Keynesian schools that differentiate consumption of consumer goods and capital goods, and are maybe in favor of investment in capital goods as opposed to just buying baubles. But that's not really going to be too relevant in this video, I don't think. And then there's the misallocation of resources school. Misallocation of resources schools. Austrians think this, the first and foremost. I don't know if there's some other school that thinks this, but you have the misallocation of resources, which is mainly that there's a bunch of malinvestments. There's a cluster of errors, as Rothbard said. And this cluster of errors it could be a fad, right? But it could be some misinformation somehow issued to investors. But usually it's a result of the state doing stuff. And usually a result of artificial monetary expansion. Could be fiscal expansion, but generally it's done by the presses. And how does this work? Well, when you expand the money supply, you're expanding the pool of credit, right? In an economy. So you're expanding credit. And what does that do? Well, that artificially lowers the price of credit, right? It lowers the price of money. So the interest rate goes down. If the interest rate goes down, what's that going to do to certain projects? Well, it's going to make projects appear more profitable than they really are. How do I explain this? Well, how profitable something, quote-unquote, really is depends on deferred consumption. That is, people producing stuff and then deferring their consumption of other stuff. And so they have a bunch of notes, a bunch of dollars, whatever, that they have saved up. But those dollars represent real deferred consumption, right? And in the economic aggregate, there actually is that, because they actually turned the crank a few times and took nothing out. So now there really is deferred consumption out there, right? So there's real deferred consumption, so each of those dollars represents stuff produced but not taken out, right? So there's kind of a balance there in terms of projects that are, and so if those resources are then put into new projects, there's a balance. The interest rate accurately reflects the deferred consumption and the conceived risk of the venture based on what people want, you know. So that makes a lot of sense to me, right? And if you artificially expand the money supply, you're now creating more new dollars than there is deferred consumption. And this is going to result in an overinvestment, right? But once the dollars work their way through the system, the prices of the capital goods is going to go up, and it's going to be revealed that these projects are not in fact profitable. They only appear profitable when interest rates were artificially lowered. All right. I believe that is a fair description of misallocation theory. Now, but there could be a problem here. This misallocation idea makes one assumption all the way through, and that assumption is that people are behaving rationally. On aggregate, behaving rationally. That people systematically are behaving rationally. That's the assumption. What if people engage in systematic irrationalities? Well, one systematic irrationality could be an over-investment. Investors wanting to invest more than what a rational actor would want to invest. Or systematic, then that would be bullishness or bearishness, right? Systematic underinvestment. Underinvestment and underconsumption of consumer goods. Basically, hoarding money. Okay, so they're hoarding money now, right? And let's take the example of hoarding money. A liquidity trap would be where I forgot. How could I forget? I believe what a liquidity trap is when money's expanded and the investors just sit on it. Yeah. In the perfect theory of it is that you can expand money to infinity and investors are still going to sit on it forever, because their marginal propensity to hold or whatever. Basically, they're not spending the money on anything, not consuming, not investing. In reality, there's not ever really a pure liquidity trap. It's usually kind of sort of. Usually it's just people are not investing at a rate that would be rational, quote unquote. This is the idea. Is it true? Well, that's the question. So the idea is that, say, for example, interest rates in a market are at 10%. As a result, nothing's being invested in, or very little is being invested in. Let's say that the rational interest rates are 7%. Okay? If that were the case, then what the central bank should do is expand the money supply, until interest rates are down to 7%. They would set 7% as their target and target it down there. But then you have a problem. What if the central bank says, oh, well, 7%, what if they say 4%? What if they think what if the economy is in fact irrationally underinvesting? The rational interest rate would be 7%, but the central bank thinks that the rational interest rate is 4%. What happens then? Well, what happens then is you get an artificial expansion of credit. And you get an artificial boom and then a bust. Because then you have an artificial overinvestment, the money works its way through, reality is revealed, and the new ventures go bankrupt. And that capital gets dissolved and used in some other way. So that's what I see. As for empirical studies on systematic bullishness and bearishness of investors, I think I vaguely recall hearing some of that stuff. I'm not really going to challenge that, that seems because the reason I'm not going to challenge it is that because it seems like a simple empirical thing that would have been verified a long time ago. That's what it seems like to me. So I don't really question that. What I question is central banks' ability to accurately guess to what degree is the market interest rate rational. And I suspect that central banks systematically underestimate to what extent the market interest rates reflect a real misallocation of resources. For example, the housing bust, reflecting a real systematic misallocation of resources. So, another problem that I would see happening is that if you expand credit below the market rate, even if the market rate is quote-unquote irrational, you still, and this might not be true, but it appears to me you're still facing a central planning problem. And this is actually a bit hairy. Because it's like, well, let's say the rational interest rate is 7%. Well, then if you if you use a central bank to expand credit to drop interest rates down to 7%, then any business venture that is profitable at 7% will be profitable all the way through the recession and out the other end. Right? Once the market rate comes back down, people get over their bearishness and start investing properly, that it will in fact be all right. But what you have done, if you nominally, let's say you nominally expand credit, and you cause an investment in a new industry, and it's profitable at 7%, you're still dealing. What you're then going to have is you're going to break the bearishness, and then have a, like, let's say there's $300 billion worth of credit, and the central bank expands credit $100 billion in order to lower the interest rate down to 7%, which is the rational rate. And business gets moving. That then breaks the bearish spell. And then investors are now more willing to let go of their money. And so then interest rates fall down to 5%. Or maybe down to 4% or whatever. Which then becomes irrationally low once you pop out the other side. Maybe I'm just ignorant. Maybe this has already been dealt with. So that's what I have to say about that. But I don't trust central planners to do this, and I don't trust. How do I say this? I get very uncomfortable. I get very uncomfortable when people who are not fundamentally skeptical of the state explain Keynesian economics correctly. Maybe this is like people should believe in religion for their own good, but I think people should believe in the straw man and lies about Keynesianism, because if they believe in the truth, then they're going to try to get this insane idea that central banks can actually properly implement it or will properly implement it. That's my fundamental criticism of it. Also, the criticism would be that just generally not knowing whether it's a misallocation of resources issue or a animal spirits issue, and also yeah, and besides, recessions pass anyway. That's one thing to say. Even if interest rates are irrationally high in the marketplace, where the rational interest rate would be 7%, I mean, eventually it's going to come down. Eventually the misallocations are going to be cleared. I mean, people start investing more. People start finding, the few who do invest start to find a higher return on investment, and the animal spirits swing back. So I really don't see it. How do I say this? I don't see the swinging back between the bears and the bulls to be as dire of an issue that's worth having a central bank over. That's what I'll say about that.